Of all the what-ifs in this world, this is the one I keep coming back to. It changes almost nothing on the surface, and absolutely everything underneath at 6:20 in the morning. On the 1st of November, 1981, Petunia Dursley opened her front door to put out the milk bottles. There was a baby asleep on the step. He was wrapped in a blanket, and his fists were curled up under his chin, and there was a cut on his forehead, shaped like a bolt of lightning. She did not scream. That is the first thing that was different, and it was such a small thing that nobody noticed it, including her. She did not scream, because tucked against the blanket there were 2 envelopes, and one of them was addressed in handwriting she had known since she was 6 years old. Petunia Dursley kept that second letter for nearly 16 years. She carried it in the pocket of her apron, and then in the lining of her handbag, and then in a tin at the back of a cupboard where nobody in that house ever looked. She did not show it to her husband. She did not show it to her son. She did not show it to the boy it was really about, not for 16 years, and when she finally did, it was the only thing she had left that was hers to give. To understand why, you have to understand what was in it. And to understand that, we have to start with the first letter, the one everybody knows about. She read that one standing in the hall with the baby in her arms, because he had woken up and started to cry, and she had picked him up without thinking about it. That is the sort of thing hands do on their own. The letter was written on thick paper in green ink, and it was signed by a man called Albus Dumbledore. It told her that her sister Lily was dead. It told her that Lily's husband James was dead too. It told her that a wizard called Lord Voldemort had killed them, and that he had tried to kill their son, and that he had failed, and that nobody entirely understood why. Then it told her the part she was meant to care about. Lily had died standing between her son and the man who came for him. That kind of dying leaves something behind, the letter said. It leaves a protection in the blood. Lily's blood ran in her son, and it ran in her sister, and while the boy could call his aunt's house his home, no one who served Lord Voldemort could touch him there. Keep him until he is 17, the letter said. He will be safe with you and nowhere else on earth. And then, near the bottom, one line that Petunia would think about every single night for the next decade. Voldemort is gone, the letter said. I do not believe he is gone for good. She stood in her own hallway in her dressing gown, holding a child who was not hers, being told that a murderer might come back for him. Any reasonable woman would have felt the floor till. Petunia felt something else. Petunia felt the specific, cold, familiar fury of being handed a problem by the wizarding world and being expected to solve it quietly. Because this was not the first letter she had ever received from Albus Dumbledore. She had written to him once. She was 13 years old, and her little sister had just come home from a school that did not exist, full of a language Petunia did not speak, and Petunia had sat at her bedroom desk for 4 nights, writing and rewriting a letter to a headmaster she had never met. She asked to be allowed to come too. She said she would work harder than anyone. She said she did not mind if she was not as good as Lily. He wrote back. He was very kind. Kind is the worst thing you can be when the answer is no, because it leaves you nothing to be angry at except yourself. Petunia had spent the 10 years since then building a life with a very low ceiling and very clean windows, and she had done it on purpose. And now there was a wizard on her doorstep in a blanket. She should have put him down. She meant to put him down. Instead, she looked at the second envelope, still lying on the step, going soft in the drizzle. It said one word on the front, in green ink, that was not Dumbledore's. Tuny. Nobody had called her that in 6 years. She carried the baby to the kitchen, and she sat down at her own table in the dark, and she opened her sister's letter with her thumb. It had been written weeks before, in a house Petunia had never visited, by a woman who was hiding for her life and had apparently found the time. It had never been sent. Dumbledore had found it in the wreckage, and he had not read it, and he had put it with the child, because Albus Dumbledore was a man who who understood exactly one thing about Petunia Dursley, and it was this. She read it twice. Then she folded it into a small square and put it in her apron pocket, and she held it there through the flat of her hand, the way you hold a bird. I will tell you what was in it later. That is not me being clever. That is because Petunia did not tell anyone for 16 years, and I'm not going to be the one who tells you first. What I can tell you is what she did next. At 7:30, Vernon Dursley came downstairs in his work suit and found his wife sitting at the kitchen table with a strange child asleep against her shoulder. Petunia had made tea. There were 2 cups out. She had been waiting for him, and she had used the hour to decide exactly how the conversation was going to go. And Vernon walked into it the way a man walks into a glass door. "What?" said Vernon. "Is that?" "That is my sister's son," said Petunia. "My sister is dead. She was murdered on Wednesday night. His name is Harry." Vernon Dursley was not a clever man, but he was not a slow one either, and he understood the shape of the next 30 years in about 4 seconds. He put down his briefcase. "Absolutely not," he said. "He is 15 months old, Vernon. There are places for this. There are proper places, councils, homes." He was going red in a rising line, from collar to hairline. "We are not taking in one of them." "One of what?" said Petunia. That stopped him, because he had never had to say it out loud in his own kitchen before. He had said plenty about her sister over the years, and Petunia had let him, and had sometimes joined in, and she had always felt slightly ill afterwards, and had never once said so. "You know perfectly well what," Vernon said. "I do," said Petunia. "Say it." He did not say it. He said a great many other things instead, for about 20 minutes, and some of them were about the neighbors, and some of them were about what Marge would think, and one of them was about how he had not signed up for this, which was true, and which Petunia did not bother to argue with. She let him finish. She was good at letting people finish. Then she put the tea down in front of him, and she said the sentence she had built at 4 in the morning while the kettle boiled. "If he goes, I go with him." Vernon laughed. It came out wrong, high and short, and he heard it and stopped. "You wouldn't." "I would be gone by Tuesday," said Petunia. "I would take Dudley. You would explain it at the office." That last part was the knife, and she knew it. Vernon Dursley could survive almost anything except being explained about. He sat down. He drank the tea, which was too hot, and did not notice. "Why," he said at last, and there was something almost human in it. "Petunia, why?" And here is the thing. She could have told him about the blood protection. She could have told him about the murderer who might come back. She could have made it a matter of safety and duty, and Vernon might even have understood that, because Vernon understood locks and insurance. She did not. She looked at the baby, who had woken up and was staring at Vernon with enormous green eyes, entirely unafraid, the way you only are before somebody teaches you. "Because there is nobody else," said Petunia Dursley, "and because he has her eyes, and I'm not going to spend the rest of my life knowing I sent them away." That is the divergence. That is the whole thing. One woman, at 7:30 in the morning, in a kitchen in Surrey, saying a true sentence out loud instead of swallowing it. Everything that follows costs somebody something. Vernon Dursley did not walk out that day. That would have been simpler for everyone, including him. What he did instead was worse and much more ordinary. He stayed, and he arranged his life so that the boy was not in it. He did not hit Harry. He never once hit Harry. He simply behaved for the next 7 years as though there were a piece of furniture in the house that he had not chosen and could not move. He did not speak to him. He did not look at him at dinner. When Petunia said, "the boys," Vernon said, "Dudley," and left a small hole in the sentence where the other name should have been. And that hole got bigger every year, and Harry, being a child, thought that hole was his fault. Children always do. The second bedroom on the first floor of number 4, Privet Drive, had been full of Dudley's spare things. Petunia cleared it out on the 3rd of November. She did it alone, at night, carrying boxes down to the garage 2 at a time, because Vernon had said he would not lift a finger and had meant it. She put a cot in it and a lamp shaped like a duck that had been Dudley's and that Dudley had never liked. She painted the walls yellow the following spring. There was a cupboard under the stairs in that house. In another life, it had a boy in it. In this one, it had a hoover and a folded pushchair, and about 40 jars of jam that Petunia made every September out of a competitive instinct she could not explain, and it never had anything else in it, ever. That is not a small thing. Hold on to it. Now, Dudley Dursley. I want to be careful here, because the easy version of this story is the one where Petunia turns kind and the whole house turns kind with her, and everyone learns and grows and the fridge is full of love. That is not what happened. What happened is that Petunia Dursley, who had been raising one son with the total suffocating undivided attention of a woman with nothing else in her life, suddenly had 2, and she could not do for 2 what she had been doing for 1. There was not enough of her. So Dudley, at 17 months, went from being the center of the world to being one of a pair. Nobody explained it to him. Nobody could have. He learned it the way toddlers learn things, by reaching for something and finding a hand already there. He bit Harry in March 1982. Properly, on the arm, hard enough to break the skin. Petunia came into the room and found Harry screaming and Dudley standing over him looking triumphant and terrified at the same time. What she did next mattered more than anything else in this story for about 10 years. She picked up Harry and she checked the bite and she cleaned it. Then she sat down on the floor with both of them, one on each side, and she did not shout and she did not smack Dudley and she did not say, "He is your cousin and you must love him," because that is a sentence that has never worked on any child in history. She said, "That hurt him. Look at his face. That is what your teeth did." Dudley looked. Dudley cried. Petunia held both of them until they stopped, and then she made toast, and that was that. She got it wrong plenty of other times. I am not going to pretend she was good at this. Petunia Dursley was sharp and proud and a terrible snob, and she twitched her net curtains at every car that parked wrong on Privet Drive. She could be unbearable. She once did not speak to Harry for 2 days because he told the woman at number 7 that they had jam for breakfast, and the woman at number 7 had laughed. But she fed him. She read to him. She learned that he was frightened of the noise the boiler made, and she left his door open. When he was 4 and had a fever, she sat on the floor by the bed all night with her back against the radiator, and in the morning Vernon found her there and stepped over her legs on his way to the bathroom without a word. By the time Harry was 5 and Dudley was 5, they had worked out an arrangement of their own, the way children do underneath whatever the adults think is happening. At home, they were rivals. Dudley took things, Harry hid things. They fought over the television and the last biscuit and who got the seat by the window in the car. But at the primary school in Little Whinging, Dudley Dursley let it be known that nobody touched his cousin. Not out of love. Out of ownership, mostly, which at 5 years old is what love looks like when nobody has taught you the other one. But it held. Dudley was big for his age and getting bigger, and Harry was small and quick and wore Dudley's old jumpers with the sleeves turned up 3 times, and between them they were more or less fine. And then there was the wig. Harry was 6. His class had a teacher that term called Mrs. Sowerby, who wore a hairpiece that everybody in the school pretended not to notice, and who had a way of holding a child by the top of the arm when she was cross that left 4 small marks. One Tuesday, in front of 28 children, Mrs. Sowerby's hairpiece turned bright blue. Nobody could explain it. It stayed blue. It was blue for 11 days, because it turned out that no amount of washing would shift it. And eventually she bought a new one and never mentioned it again, and the story went round Little Whinging for a month. Petunia Dursley was called into the school. She sat in a plastic chair in a corridor that smelled of floor polish and old milk, waiting for her turn, with her handbag on her knees and both hands on top of it. And what she felt, sitting there, was not fear exactly, It was recognition. She had seen this before. She had seen a flower open and close in a child's palm on a summer afternoon in Cokeworth 20 years earlier, and she had felt her whole life narrow down to a point. Harry came out of the office looking small and white. She took him home. She made him beans on toast. And then she asked him one question. "Were you cross with her?" He nodded. He was crying, and trying not to, in that awful silent way children have when they have decided that crying will make it worse. "Did you want something to happen to her?" He nodded again. Petunia sat down opposite him. She had planned this conversation on and off for 4 years, and every version of it she had planned started with a lie, and she abandoned all of them in about a second. "All right," she said. "Then that is what happened." He stared at her. "Not now," she said. "You are 6. When you are older, I will tell you all of it, and I mean all of it, and you are going to be very cross with me for making you wait. But listen to me now, because this part is important." She leaned forward. "You are not broken. There is nothing wrong with you. You are not to be frightened of yourself. Do you understand me? Whatever else happens in this house, that is true." Harry, who was 6, did not understand a word of it. But he remembered it. He remembered it in a graveyard when he was 14. He remembered it in a forest when he was 17. Some sentences are like that. You put them in a child and they sit there for years doing nothing. And then one night they hold up the roof. Now, there was a woman living on Wisteria Walk called Arabella Figg. She had a great many cats, and a smell of boiled cabbage and a habit of appearing at exactly the moment Petunia needed somebody to mind the boys. She was always available. She was available on bank holidays and Christmas Eve, and at 2 hours' notice on a wet Thursday, and she never once asked for money, and she never once forgot which of the 2 boys took sugar. It took Petunia 4 years to work it out. What gave it away was not the cats. It was the fact that Mrs. Figg never asked a single question about Harry's parents. Everyone asked. Every neighbor, every mother at the school gate, every dentist and hairdresser in Little Whinging asked, because a child arriving out of nowhere is the best thing that has ever happened to a street like that one. "Where are his people?" they said. "What happened to the mother?" "Was it a car crash?" they said, having decided among themselves that it was. Arabella Figg never asked. Arabella Figg already knew. So on a Tuesday in October 1986, Petunia Dursley walked to Wisteria Walk, sat down in a room full of cats, drank a cup of tea she did not want, and said, "How long have you been watching him?" There was a very long silence. "Since the 2nd of November, 1981, said Mrs. Figg. "For Dumbledore. For Dumbledore." Petunia put down the cup. Her hand was steady, which surprised her. "Then you can carry a letter," she said. The correspondence between Petunia Dursley and Albus Dumbledore ran for 11 years, and it is my favorite thing in this entire timeline, and almost nobody in the wizarding world ever knew it existed. It worked like this. Petunia wrote her letters at the kitchen table after Vernon had gone to bed. She wrote them in biro on ordinary lined paper from the corner shop because she was not going to buy special paper for a man who had once told her no. She walked them round to Wisteria Walk. Mrs. Figg passed them on. The replies came back the same way, in green ink, on paper so thick it felt like cloth. Her first letter was 2 lines long. "Is he safe?" it said. Not, "Is he protected?" Is he safe? There is a difference, and I would like you to answer the question I asked. Dumbledore's reply ran to 2 pages. Petunia read it in the hall, and then read it again in the kitchen, and then wrote back the same night. "You have written me 2 pages, she wrote, and answered nothing. "I have had 2 pages from you before. I was 13. You will find I have not improved as an audience. I would love to tell you that he apologized. He did not. What he did was start telling her the truth in small, careful pieces, and over 11 years, those pieces added up to something the rest of the Order of the Phoenix never had. which was a complete and honest account of what Albus Dumbledore actually expected to happen to Harry Potter. Not all of it. Never all of it. There were things he would not put in writing to anyone, and there was one question in particular that Petunia asked 4 separate times over 4 years, in 4 different ways, and that he never once answered. "Why did Lord Voldemort come to my sister's house?" she asked. "Out of all the houses in Britain, why hers?" Dumbledore changed the subject every time. He was very good at it. He changed the subject with such warmth and such generosity that it took Petunia until about 1990 to notice that he was doing it on purpose. And when she noticed, she stopped asking and started counting. She kept every reply. All of them, in order, in a biscuit tin behind the tea towels. But it is the letter from the spring of 1988 that matters most, because that is the one where they had their only real fight. Petunia had written to say that she intended to tell Harry the truth about his parents. He was 7. He was asking. He had asked at Christmas, and he had asked at Easter, and last Tuesday he had asked whether his mother had known how to swim, which was the sort of question that took the legs out from under her. Dumbledore's answer was firm and gentle, and it came back in 3 days. "Let him have an ordinary childhood," he wrote. "There will be time. A boy who knows what is waiting for him carries it into every classroom and every football game and every night of his life. Give him 10 years of not knowing. It is the only gift you can give him that nobody can take away." And Petunia Dursley, sitting at her kitchen table at 11 at night, in a house where her husband had not spoken to her nephew in 6.5 years, read that, and something in her went white. Her reply was 1 paragraph. Mrs. Figg told me, years later, that the owl that carried it was in a foul mood. "You are asking me to lie to a child for 10 years so that the truth is easier for you to manage when it comes," wrote Petunia. "I know exactly what happens to a person who finds out late what she is standing in the middle of. I was 13 when I found out. Nobody explained. I have not recovered, and I do not expect to. I am telling him. You may take him away from me if you object, and we will both find out very quickly what your protection is actually worth." There was no reply for 2 weeks. Then a single line arrived. "You are right, and I was wrong, and I will not forget that you were the one who said so." She told Harry on a Saturday in June, in the garden, while Vernon was at the golf club and Dudley was at a birthday party. She had chosen a Saturday because she wanted a whole day afterwards. She had planned what to say for 4 months. She sat him down on the back step with a glass of squash, and every planned word went straight out of her head. "Your mother was a witch," said Petunia Dursley. Harry, who was 7, said, "Like in the pantomime?" "No," she said, "not like in the pantomime." It took an hour. She told him about Cokeworth and the river and a girl who could make flowers open in her hand. She told him about the letter that came for Lily and not for her, and she told him that part honestly, including the part where she had been so jealous she had been sick. She told him about a school in Scotland with moving staircases, which she had never seen and had built entirely out of things her sister had said at 14 over the Christmas holidays. She told him his father's name. She told him they had been 19 and 21 when they married. She told him that there had been a war, and that a wizard called Lord Voldemort had murdered a great many people, and that on the 31st of October, 1981, he had come to a village called Godric's Hollow and killed James Potter and then Lily Potter in that order, and had then tried to kill their son. "Why didn't it work?" said Harry. "Because she stood in front of you," said That was the moment. That was the exact moment on a backstep in Surrey in June 1988. Harry Potter, aged 7, put down his glass of squash very carefully on the concrete and said, "Did she have to?" "No," said Petunia. "She could have moved. He told her to move. He would have let her live. She said no. And then she did the thing she had promised herself she would not do, which was cry in front of him. She turned her face away and did it anyway, and it was horrible. And it went on for some time, and Harry sat there with his hand on her arm, not knowing what to do, aged 7, comforting a grown woman about a death he could not remember. Afterwards, she went upstairs and came back down with a photograph. She had kept exactly one. It had been in a shoebox in the wardrobe since 1977, and Vernon had never seen it, and she had taken it out perhaps a dozen times in 11 years. It showed 2 girls on a garden wall in Cokeworth, one about 15 and one about 17, both squinting into the sun. The younger one had dark red hair. Neither of them was quite smiling. "That is your mother," said Petunia. "That is the last summer we were friends." Harry Potter kept that photograph for the rest of his life. It was in his pocket in the Great Hall on the 2nd of May, 1998. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Here is what Petunia had not planned for. Dudley was not at the birthday party. Dudley had come home early, because there had been an argument about a bouncy castle, and Dudley had been standing in the kitchen behind the back door for the last 40 minutes of that conversation with a bag of crisps going soft in his hand. Dudley Dursley, aged 7, now knew that magic was real, that his cousin had it, and that his mother had spent his entire life keeping an enormous secret from everybody in the house, including him. He did not tell his father. Give him that. He was 7 years old, and he sat on that for 4 days. What he did instead, on the following Wednesday, was tell Piers Polkiss and 2 other boys in the playground that his cousin was a wizard, and that his cousin's mum and dad had been murdered by a different wizard with a stick. You can imagine how that went. It went round that school in an afternoon and round Little Whinging in a week. By Friday, Harry Potter was the boy who said his parents were killed by magic. And there is nothing on this earth that children are crueler about than a story that sounds like showing off and grief at the same time. Harry did not defend himself. That is the interesting part. He came home with a torn shirt and would not say who did it. And when Petunia asked him straight out whether he had told anybody, he said no, which was true. And he did not say who had. He never said. Not that year, not ever. Dudley waited about 11 days for the roof to fall in, and it did not fall in, and that was the beginning of something that took another 7 years to finish becoming. But the roof did fall in somewhere else. Mrs. Polkiss told her husband. Mr. Polkiss played squash on Thursdays with a man from Grunnings. Vernon Dursley came home on the 22nd of June, 1988, and he did not shout. That was how Petunia knew. He came into the kitchen and put his keys down and said, quite quietly, "They are laughing at me at work." "I know," said Petunia. "You told him." "I told him." "You told a 7-year-old boy that his mother was a witch." Vernon's voice went up just slightly and then came back down, and that was somehow worse. "In my house, after I have spent 7 years, Petunia, keeping this family respectable while you—" And he stopped, because he could not think of a word that was both accurate and sayable. "Say it," said Petunia. "I have put a roof over that boy," Vernon said. "I have fed him. I have never raised a hand to him. I have done more than any man in this street would have done. And I have asked for exactly one thing in return, which is that it stays in this house. And the awful thing, the thing that makes this story worth telling, is that he was not entirely wrong. Vernon Dursley had done more than most men on that street would have done. He had done it badly and coldly, and with a small daily cruelty of omission that would take Harry 20 years to stop feeling. But he had done it, and he genuinely believed he had been generous, and by the standards he had been raised with, he had been. He was going to find out. said Petunia. "Then he could have found out at 11 when they take him away, and it would not have been my problem." "He is a child, Vernon. He is not a problem." "He is your problem," said Vernon Dursley. "He has always been your problem. You chose that on the first morning, and you have chosen it every day since, and do not stand in my kitchen and pretend otherwise." They had it out for 3 hours. It was not a good argument. Both of them said things that were true, which is what makes an argument unsurvivable. At about 11 o'clock, Vernon said the sentence he had been circling for 7 years, which was, "It is him or me," and he said it expecting the same answer he had got in 1981, which was a negotiation. Petunia did not negotiate. Petunia was 30 and tired, and had spent the afternoon telling a child how his mother died. "Then it is him," she said. Vernon Dursley moved out of number 4, Privet Drive, on the 4th of July, 1988. He took 2 suitcases and the good car. He told the neighbors it was a work posting to Coventry, and Petunia backed him up on that every single time for the next 9 years, because whatever else she was not going to be the woman who let little whinging watch. He paid the mortgage every month on time for 9 years, and he never missed one, and he never came back either. That was the exact shape of Vernon Dursley. He would pay for anything except the thing that was actually being asked of him. So, here is Privet Drive in the autumn of 1988. One woman, 30 years old, with no qualifications and 9 years out of the workforce, doing 4 mornings a week on the reception desk at a doctor's surgery and little whinging and hating every hour of it. 2 boys, 8 years old, one of whom has just lost his father to a lie about Coventry. That is the price. And Harry Potter paid a part of it that nobody ever asked him to pay, because Dudley Dursley worked out the arithmetic before either adult did. He said it in October. They were in the 2nd bedroom, which had bunk beds in it now, because Petunia had sold the good sofa and put the boys in one room and let out nothing. And Dudley had the top bunk because he had won it in a fight. "He left because of you," said Dudley in the dark. Harry said nothing. "My dad left because of you." "I know," said Harry. And then Dudley Dursley, aged 8, who was not a nice child and would not be a nice child for another 6 years, said the first genuinely brave thing of his life, which was, "It wasn't your fault, though." There was a long silence. "Sort of was," said Harry. "Yeah," said Dudley. "Sort of was." They did not speak again for the rest of the night, and in the morning, Dudley pushed him into a hedge on the way to school. But something had been said out loud in that room that would not be unsaid, and both of them knew it. The 3 years after that were the hardest and the happiest, and they went by in the way that hard, happy years do, which is very fast and mostly in the kitchen. Money was tight in the exact way that is worst, which is not quite tight enough to qualify for anything. Petunia did 4 mornings at the surgery and took in sewing and stopped buying meat on Wednesdays. Both boys were down for Stonewall High, the local comprehensive, and neither of them was going anywhere private. Kavai. And Dudley found that out in the spring of 1990 and did not speak for a day and a half, but Dudley found boxing that year at a club above a carpet shop in Magnolia Crescent, run by a retired postman who did not care who your father was. And Dudley Dursley, who at 10 had been on his way to becoming exactly the kind of person his father was, discovered instead that he was extremely good at something that had rules, and that the rules applied to him. It did not make him kind. It made him disciplined, which at that age is nearly as useful and looks about the same from outside. Harry, meanwhile, was waiting. That is the thing nobody thinks about in this version. From the age of 7, Harry Potter knew a letter was coming. He knew the year and roughly the month. He spent 3 years knowing. He asked his aunt about it constantly, and she answered, and about half of what she told him was wrong. And Dudley Dursley, because she was working entirely from things her sister had said between 1971 and 1975. She told him there were 4 houses and got 2 of the names right. She told him about a game played on brooms and could not remember what it was called. She told him the suites were strange and that there was a train from London and that the ceiling of the hall was bewitched to look like the sky, which she had never believed and which turned out to be true. And she told him over and over the one thing she was certain of. "They will all know your name," she said. "Do not let that be the most interesting thing about you." She had no idea how right she was. That is the part I love. Petunia Dursley thought she was warning him about being the odd one out. She was not. She had no notion of it, because Petunia had asked Albus Dumbledore in a letter in 1989 whether the wizarding world knew what had happened at Godric's Hollow. And Dumbledore had written back that yes, it was widely known, and that Harry was remembered with a great deal of affection. A great deal of affection. 11 words, chosen by a careful man, and every single one of them a door with a curtain over it. The letters came on the 24th of July, 1991. 2 of them carried by the same owl, which landed on the windowsill of number 4 at 8:10 in the morning and waited with visible impatience for somebody to open the window. Dudley saw it first. Dudley said a word he had learned at the boxing club. Harry's letter was addressed to Mr. H. Potter. The second bedroom, number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. He read it standing up. Then he sat down on the floor of the hall, still holding it, and did not move for about a minute. And when Petunia came in from the kitchen, he looked up at her with his mother's eyes and said, "It's real. It's actually real." "Yes," said Petunia. "I told you it was real. You could have been wrong." "I am never wrong," said Petunia Dursley, and went back into the kitchen and stood with both hands flat on the counter and her head down for rather a long time. Her own letter was shorter. "He will need to be taken to Diagon Alley," it said. "Somebody will come on Wednesday. I have thought about this day for 10 years, and I find I have very little to say that would be useful. Thank you, Petunia. I have not deserved you." She read it 3 times. Then she wrote a reply that said, in full, "Come yourself," and gave it to Mrs. Figg. And on Wednesday morning, the person who knocked on the door of number 4, Privet Drive, was not Albus Dumbledore. He was about 11 feet tall, or looked it, and he had to come in sideways, and he was carrying a birdcage. "Rubeus Hagrid," he said, "keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts, and you'll be Harry." Harry Potter looked up and up and up. "Blimey," said Hagrid. "You look just like him, except the eyes. You've got your mother's." And he stopped and looked past Harry at the woman standing in the hall behind him with her arms folded, and went the color of a brick. "I've got her eyes as well," said Petunia. "It happens in families. I want to be fair to Hagrid here, because he behaved beautifully all day. He had come expecting something. Everyone in the wizarding world who thought about it at all had spent 10 years expecting something, and the something they expected was a small unhappy boy in a cold house. Because that is what people assume about a child raised by muggles who hated his mother. What he found was a boy in a jumper that had been washed to death, sitting at a kitchen table being told to eat something before he went out because it was going to be a long day. Hagrid did not manage to hide his face, and Petunia saw it and understood every part of it and filed it away. They went to London by train, all 3 of them, because Petunia Dursley was not going to be left at home and said so before anyone could suggest it. Hagrid did not argue. Hagrid, it turned out, had not been told he could not bring her, and Hagrid was constitutionally incapable of telling anybody they could not come. Which is how Petunia Dursley, aged 33, walked into the leaky cauldron. She had heard of it. Lily had described it once, one in 1972, in a letter that Petunia had read 400 times and then burned. It was smaller than she had imagined and much darker, and it smelled of wood smoke and old beer, and there was a bald man behind the bar polishing a glass, and about a dozen people at the tables, and the moment the door swung shut behind them, every single one of them stopped talking. "Bless my soul," whispered the barman. "Harry Potter, what an honor." And then they came. All of them at once, chairs going back, hands out, a man who shook Harry's hand and could not let go, a woman crying, someone saying, "Welcome back, Mr. Potter, welcome back," over and over. Harry stood in the middle of it, with his shoulders up around his ears. Petunia stood behind him with her handbag over her arm, and watched the wizarding world of Great Britain fall on an 11-year-old boy like weather. And she did not say one word, and inside, she was doing arithmetic. They knew his name, all of them, on sight, from the scar. That meant they had known for 10 years. That meant that while she was carrying a screaming toddler up and down a hallway at 3 in the morning and telling a 5-year-old that there was nothing wrong with him and losing her husband and selling her sofa, there had been an entire country of people who knew exactly who that boy was and where he had gone, and not one of them had ever written to ask if he was warm. She waited until they were through the back door and into the courtyard, and Hagrid was counting bricks, and Harry was staring at the wall. "A great deal of affection," said Petunia, "to nobody." Diagon Alley did to Harry what Diagon Alley does to everyone. He forgot to be embarrassed. He forgot his aunt was there for whole minutes at a time, which she noticed and did not mind. It did something else to Petunia. She had spent 20 years telling herself that she had not missed anything, that it was a school, that it was a trick, that her sister had gone away to learn a party skill and come back with an accent and a superior expression. And then she stood in a crooked street full of cauldrons and owls and children, her nephew's age, arguing about broomsticks, in the middle of a whole world, an entire functioning world with banks in it. And she understood, at 33, standing outside a shop selling telescopes, precisely how much she had been told no to. She did not cry. Petunia Dursley did not cry in public. She put her chin up and said, "Well, it is filthy," and walked on. And Harry, who was 11 and knew her better than anyone alive, took her hand for about 4 seconds and then let go before Hagrid could see. Gringotts was where the day turned over. Harry had a vault. Nobody had told him. Nobody had told Petunia. Hagrid produced a small key, and a goblin checked it, and a cart took them down through the dark, and the door opened on mounds of gold coins stacked higher than Harry's head. And Harry said, "Whose is this?" "Yours," said Hagrid. "Your parents left it you." There was a silence in that vault that went on slightly too long. Then Harry said, in a small flat voice, "Since when?" "Since always, I suppose." Harry Potter turned round and looked at his aunt. And Petunia Dursley, who had sold a sofa, who had done 4 mornings a week for 3 years on a reception desk, who had darned the elbows of that jumper twice, looked back at him with an expression that Harry did not understand for another 6 years. "Take what you need for school," she said. "Aunt Petunia. Take what you need for school, Harry." On the way up he tried. Of course he tried. He was 11 and he had just found out he was rich, and the first thing he thought of was the electricity meter in the hall at home, because that is the kind of child she had raised, and he said, "You could have some. We could change it into proper money. They must do that here. They must." And Petunia said, "Absolutely not," in a voice that closed the subject for 6 years. She never took a connaught of it, not one. He offered again at 12, and at 14, and at 16. And she said no every time. And I want you to remember that when we get to 1997, because when Harry finally understood why, it was worse than being refused. The rest of it was ordinary and wonderful. Robes and a cauldron and a pile of books that Petunia read the titles of with an expression of undisguised hunger. Hagrid bought Harry a snowy owl for his birthday, and Harry named her Hedwig out of a history book on the way home, And Petunia said, "It is not living in the kitchen." And it lived in the kitchen. And then there was Ollivander's. I am not going to describe the whole thing, because you know how it goes. Wand after wand, boxes everywhere, a very old man with pale eyes, enjoying himself far too much, and then holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, and warmth in the fingers, and red and gold sparks, and Mr. Ollivander saying, "Oh, bravo," and then going quiet. "Curious," he said. "How very curious." "What is?" said Harry. "I remember every wand I have ever sold." Ollivander's eyes went to the scar and stayed there. The phoenix whose tail feather sits in your wand gave one other feather, just one. It is curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother gave you that scar. Harry did not say anything. Harry did not entirely follow. Petunia followed perfectly. She stood in that shop with a boys' school list in her handbag, and she understood with total clarity that the man who murdered her sister had held the brother of the wand her nephew had just picked up, and that this old man thought that was interesting. "You sold it to him," she said. "The wand. You sold him the wand he did it with." Ollivander turned to look at her. He seemed to see her properly for the first time. "I have sold a great many wands, madam," he said, "and I do not choose what is done with them. 13.5 inches. You. A very powerful wand. I remember thinking so at the time." "And now you have sold my nephew its brother," said Petunia, "and you are pleased." There was a pause. "I am interested," said Mr. Ollivander. "It is not the same thing, but I take your meaning, and I find I do not enjoy it." They caught the 4:05 from Charing Cross. Hagrid saw them onto the platform and shook Harry's hand for a very long time and got something in his eye. Harry slept for most of the journey with his head against the window and the owl cage on his knees. Petunia sat opposite him and did not sleep at all. That night she wrote her longest letter to Albus Dumbledore. It was 4 pages. Most of it was practical because she was practical. The last paragraph was not. "You told me in 1981 that you did not believe he was gone for good," she wrote. "Today, an old man in a shop told me that my nephew is carrying the brother of the wand that killed my sister, and told me it was curious, and I watched a room full of adults treat a child like a monument. I have been thinking about it all the way home on the train, and I have arrived at a question, and I want a straight answer. Are you sending him to school?" she wrote. "Or are you sending him to the front?" The reply came 2 days later, and Petunia read it and put it in the tin with the others and never showed it to a living soul. Whatever was in it, she let him get on the train. On the 1st of September, 1991, 3 people walked through a solid brick barrier at King's Cross Station, and one of them was a boxer. One of them was a wizard, and one of them was a woman in a good coat who had been told 20 years earlier that this was not for her. Petunia had insisted on the barrier. Hagrid had explained in a letter that ordinary people could come through with a wizarding family, and Petunia had read that sentence about 9 times. She went through first. She wanted to see it before anyone could watch her seeing it. The Hogwarts Express was scarlet, and the steam came down the platform in great slow banks, and there were owls screaming and cats yowling, and a boy near the front shouting about a toad. Petunia Dursley stood on platform 9 3/4 with her handbag over her arm and looked at it for 11 seconds. "Right," she said. "Where is your trunk?" Dudley carried the trunk. That was not planned, and nobody commented on it. Dudley Dursley, 11 years old, in his new Stonewall uniform because he had to go straight on to his own first day afterwards, carried his cousin's school trunk the length of platform 9 3/4 and heaved it up into the carriage, and then stood on the platform with his hands in his pockets and his ears going red. "So it's a castle," said Dudley. "Apparently," said Harry. "Right." Dudley looked at the train. "Is it any good then, your school?" "I don't know yet." "Well," said Dudley. And then, because he had spent 3 weeks working out something to say, And this was the last available moment. If anyone starts on you, you tell them your cousin boxes. Harry laughed. He could not help it. Dudley went crimson and punched him on the arm, hard, and that was the most affection the two of them had ever managed in one place. Petunia's goodbye took 4 seconds and lasted him 7 years. She straightened his collar, which did not need straightening. She said, "Write on Sunday, every Sunday. If you do not write, I will assume you are dead, and I will come up there. You can't get to Scotland." "Do not," said Petunia Dursley. "Tell me what I can get to." And then she put her hand flat against the side of his face for a moment, which she had done perhaps 5 times in 10 years, and said, "You are not going up there to be a monument. Do you hear me?" "Yes." "Say it back." "I'm not going up there to be a monument." "Good," said his aunt. "Get on the train." He found a compartment near the back with one boy in it, a tall, thin boy with red hair and a smudge on his nose, who said the seat was free and then spent 4 minutes pretending not to stare at Harry's forehead. His name was Ron Weasley. He had 5 older brothers, 2 of whom were on this train, and a little sister who had cried at the barrier because she was too young to come. He had a rat that had belonged to one of his brothers and had never done anything interesting in its life. At 12:30 the trolley came, and Ron went red and said he had brought sandwiches and produced them, and they were dry, and he said his mother always forgot he did not like corned beef. "I've got some," said Harry. "My aunt does about 9 of them. She thinks trains don't have food." They swapped. That was it. That was the entire foundation of the most important friendship of Harry Potter's life. 1 dry corned beef sandwich for 1 cheese and pickle, and neither of them ever mentioned it again. Then Harry bought the trolley out because he had the money and he was 11. And it was the single most exciting thing that had ever been available to him. And they ate chocolate frogs until they felt ill. And Ron told him about Quidditch. And Harry told Ron that his cousin was a boxer, and Ron did not know what boxing was, and it took 20 minutes to explain, and Ron thought it was the stupidest thing he had ever heard. A girl came in twice, looking for the toad. Her name was Hermione Granger, and she was 11 years old, and she talked the way people talk when they have been told all their lives that they are clever and have never once been told they are wanted. She had learned every course book by heart. She said so. Twice. Ron pulled a face at her the second time she left. Harry saw him do it. And Harry, who had been raised by a woman who noticed everything and said nothing until it was worth saying, did not say anything. That is a small thing. It cost somebody a great deal about 8 weeks later. You know the sorting. Everyone knows the sorting. A hall with a ceiling like the sky, 4 long tables, a hat on a stool singing a song about itself. Here is the part that was different. When the hat came down over Harry's eyes, it did not say what it says. It sat on his head for a very long time, long enough for the hall to start murmuring, long enough for a boy called Neville Longbottom to look up from the Gryffindor table with his mouth open. "Well now," said the hat inside his head, "this is not what I was expecting at all." "What were you expecting?" "Somebody hungry." The hat sounded almost put out. "There is a great deal of courage in here. There is talent, and there is a temper. Oh yes, there is a lovely temper. But you are not hungry. Somebody has fed you." "Is that bad?" "It is inconvenient," said the hat. "I have Slytherin sitting right at the front of you, boy, and you would do very well there. You have been taught to keep your head down and hold what is yours and never let them see you count. That is not cowardice. That is a woman who survived something, teaching a child how she did it." Harry Potter sat very still on that stool. "She wouldn't like it," he said. "No," agreed the hat. "She would loathe it. She would also never say so, and that would be worse. Well, you have a choice, which is more than most people get. Where shall I put you?" And Harry, aged 11, thought about a photograph of 2 girls on a garden wall in Cokeworth and about which one of them had gone somewhere, she was not afraid. "The one my mother was in," he said. "Gryffindor," said the hat out loud, and the hall came apart. The first 2 months were the best 2 months of his life so far, and I'm not going to spend long on them because they were ordinary, and ordinary was the point. He was bad at potions and good at flying. He wrote home every Sunday, long letters, 6 and 7 pages, about staircases that moved, and a ghost who lived in a toilet, and a caretaker's cat that followed him. Hedwig came back with replies that were mostly instructions. Eat properly. Do not sit at the back. If a teacher tells you something is impossible, ask him what happens if you do it anyway, and then do not do it. And on the second Thursday, in a dungeon that smelled of burnt roots, Professor Severus Snape read out the register and stopped at his name. "Ah, yes," he said softly. "Harry Potter, our new celebrity." He asked 3 questions. Harry did not know the answer to any of them. He said so 3 times, and the class laughed, and Snape kept going softer and softer until he said, "Fame clearly isn't everything," and Hermione Granger's hand was in the air like a flagpole and being ignored. "Sir," said Harry. The dungeon went quiet. "My aunt says you knew my mother. I want you to understand what happened in that room. Nothing happened. That is what makes it terrible." Severus Snape stood absolutely still at the front of a potions classroom with a ladle in his hand for about 4 seconds in front of 20 children. Then he said, "Detention, Potter. Friday. Sit down." He gave the detention. He also ended the lesson 11 minutes early and told nobody why, and went up 2 flights of stairs and stood in a corridor with his hand on a wall. And that night, Severus Snape wrote a letter to a Muggle woman in Surrey that he did not send, and wrote another one in December that he did not send, and wrote a third one in 1993 that he did not send either. He kept all 3. We will come back to them. Now Halloween, you know what happened. There was a troll. It got into the school, but here is the part of it that belongs to this timeline. That morning, in Charms, Ron Weasley said something unkind about Hermione Granger being a nightmare and having no friends. He said it in a corridor. She heard him. She went past them with her face down and spent the whole day in the girls' bathroom on the first floor. Harry heard him say it, and Harry did not say anything, because Ron was his first friend, and because Harry Potter had been taught, in a house where a man did not speak to him at dinner, that the way you survive is you do not make it worse. That is the cost of being raised careful. He was not cruel, he was quiet. Which, that afternoon, was the same thing. By evening, she was still not at the feast, and Harry sat there with a plate in front of him, getting steadily more uncomfortable, and then a man in a turban came running into the hall, shouting about a troll in the dungeons, and Harry Potter got up before anybody had finished screaming. "She doesn't know," he said. "Ron, she doesn't know." They went. They ran the whole way and they got there in time. And it was a disaster from start to finish. Harry ended up on the thing's shoulders with his wand up its nose. Ron, who had been useless with a wand for 8 weeks, got it exactly right on the first genuinely important try of his life and knocked the club out of the air and onto its own head. And when Professor McGonagall arrived, white with fury, Hermione Granger stood up in the wreckage of a bathroom and lied to a teacher for the first time in her entire life. "It's my fault, Professor," she said. "I went looking for it. I thought I could deal with it." Harry looked at Ron. Ron looked at Harry. Some friendships take years. Some of them take one lie about a troll. But Harry did something that night that the other Harry, the one in the world where he slept in a cupboard, would never have thought to do. He went upstairs and he got parchment and he wrote it all down and sent it home. Petunia Dursley received, on the 2nd of November 1991, a 6-page letter from an 11-year-old boy explaining that a mountain troll had got into his school and that 3 first years had dealt with it because no adult had reached the corridor in time. She read it standing in the hall. Then she went to Wisteria Walk in her dressing gown at 10 at night, and she wrote a letter that Mrs. Figg said afterwards was the single most frightening thing she had ever handled, and it consisted almost entirely of questions with numbers in them. How many staff? How did it enter? How long between the alarm and the response? What is the procedure? Who is responsible? Send me the answers, or send me the name of the person who has them. Dumbledore replied within a day, and answered nearly all of it, and apologized without reservation. And Petunia noticed, because she always noticed, that he had answered every question except the one about how it got in. The winter was where the story turned. Harry saw a three-headed dog on a forbidden corridor in October and wrote home about that too. He wrote home about a hooded figure in the forest, and about a package moved out of Gringotts on his birthday, and about his broom bucking under him at a Quidditch match while a teacher stared without blinking. And Petunia Dursley and little whinging began on the kitchen table to build a list. She kept it on the back of a Grunning's desk calendar from 1987. Dates on the left, events on the right. She was a receptionist. This was the one thing in the world she was actually trained to do. And at Christmas, Harry stayed at the school for the first and only time in his life, because Petunia had said he should, and she had said it because Dumbledore had written to her in November suggesting it, and she had spent 4 days furious about it, and then agreed, and then spent Christmas Day in an empty house with Dudley and a small chicken. That was the Christmas of the invisibility cloak. And the mirror. It came with a note. It had been his father's. Harry unwrapped it at 1 a.m, and by 2 a.m, he had found a room on the 3rd floor with a mirror in it, as tall as the ceiling. He saw them at once. A man with untidy black hair, a woman with dark red hair and green eyes, who put her hand up to the glass, and behind them, at the back, slightly apart, with her arms folded and her chin up, a thin woman in a good coat that Harry recognized because he had watched it come off a hanger every Sunday for 6 years. He went back 3 nights running. On the 3rd night, Albus Dumbledore was sitting in the dark on a desk against the wall. "So," said Dumbledore, "back again, Harry?" They talked for a while about what the mirror did, and Harry said the thing that everyone says, which was that he was looking at his family. And then he said the part that was his own. "But my aunt's in it," he said. "She's alive. I saw her on Sunday. Why is she in it if I've already got her?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "The mirror does not show you what you lack," he said. "It shows you what you want most. Most people who stand in front of it want a person back. You do not want a person back, Harry. You want a room." He looked at the glass. "You want all of them in one place at the same time, with nobody angry. That is a rarer wish, and I am sorry to say it is a harder one. Can I have it? Ever?" "No," said Dumbledore. "Not that room. Not as it is in the glass." And then, because he was old and tired and it was 2 a.m, "But I would not trade what you do have for it, and I have made that trade myself, and I do not recommend it." The mirror was moved the next day. Harry never saw it again until he was 17, and by then he wanted something else. The last part of that year went fast, and I am going to tell it fast, because that is how it happened. A dragon, a detention in the forest, a centaur, a hooded figure drinking unicorn blood, and Harry Potter's scar hurting so badly he could not see. And then the certainty, in June, that somebody was going to steal the Philosopher's Stone. Now, here is where this timeline breaks properly from the other one, and here is where it hurts, because it breaks in the right direction and it does not help at all. Harry went to a teacher? He did. He went to Professor McGonagall's office with Ron and Hermione behind him, and he told her, in order, everything on his aunt's calendar list, and she listened. And she told him that the stone was extremely well protected. and that Professor Dumbledore had been called away to London by the Ministry of Magic, and that she did not expect to hear another word about it from any of them. And then Harry went up to the owlery and wrote to his aunt, and Hedwig went out of the window at 4 in the afternoon. That is the correct thing to do. That is precisely what every adult in the world tells a child to do. Tell somebody, get help. Do not handle it yourself. The letter reached Little Whinging at 7:10 the following morning. Petunia read it in the hall. She was at Wisteria Walk in under 4 minutes, in her dressing gown, hammering on the door with the flat of her hand, and Arabella Figg let her in, and Arabella Figg sent word by the fastest means she had, which was a very old and very fat cat that was not entirely a cat, and took an hour and a half to reach anybody who mattered. And the man it needed to reach was on a train to London under a ministry summons that had been sent by somebody who wanted him out of Scotland. He turned round. He came back. He was 3 hours too late to stop a boy going through a trapdoor, which is what happens when every adult in a system does exactly the right thing at slightly the wrong speed. Petunia Dursley spent that night sitting on Arabella Figg's sofa surrounded by cats, being told, hourly, that there was no news. Under the school, 3 11-year-olds went through a trapdoor. There was a plant that tried to strangle them, and Hermione got them out of it. There were keys with wings, and Harry caught the right one. And then there was a chessboard, life-sized, and Ron Weasley looked at it for a minute and a half and worked out that the only way through was for one of them to be taken. He put himself where the knight could reach him. He knew exactly what he was doing. The stone knight hit him across the head, and he went down and did not get up. And Harry Potter, who had been raised for 10 years by a woman whose entire personality was built around not losing anybody else, stopped dead on that chessboard and turned back. Harry, he's not moving. Harry, we won. We have to go on. It only ends if we go on. He's not moving, Hermione. And Hermione Granger, 11 years old, grabbed him by the front of the robes and said the hardest sentence of her life. If you go back for him now, he did it for nothing. They went on. She took the potion riddle and got it right in about 4 minutes, and there was only enough of the black one for one person, and she went back for Ron and Harry went forward alone, and that is exactly how it happened in every version of this story, because some things are load-bearing. Quirinus Quirrell was waiting in front of the mirror. Harry got the stone because he wanted to find it and not to use it. And when Quirrell's hands closed on him, they blistered and blackened and burned, because a woman had stood in front of her son in Godric's Hollow, and because for 10 years and 7 months a boy had woken up in a yellow bedroom in Surrey and called it home. Harry held on. He held on until his arms gave out and the world went dark. He woke up 4 days later in the hospital wing with a table of sweets beside him and Albus Dumbledore in the chair, and sitting bolt upright on a hard wooden stool at the end of the bed in her good coat, with her handbag on her knees and both hands flat on top of it, his aunt. She had been there for 3 days. She had refused to leave. Madame Pomfrey had tried twice. "You are awake," said Petunia. "Yeah." "Good." She stood up. She crossed to the bed. And then Petunia Dursley, in front of the headmaster of Hogwarts and a school matron and 2 portraits, put her arms round her nephew and held on to him hard enough to hurt, and said into his hair, "You stupid, stupid boy," and did not let go for a long time. Afterwards, when Harry had gone back to sleep, she and Dumbledore sat on either side of the bed and had the conversation they had been building towards by letter for 10 years. "I wrote to you once," said Petunia. "I was 13. "You did," said Dumbledore. "I have it still." That surprised her. She had not expected that, and she hated being surprised. "You said no." "I did." "Was it kindness, or was it cruelty?" said Petunia. "I have had 30 years to decide, and I have not managed it, so you will tell me. Was there truly no door, or was there a door, and you did not open it, because it would have been complicated?" Albus Dumbledore looked at his hands for a while. "There was no door," he said. "That is the truth, and it is not the whole of it. The whole of it is that I could have said no more warmly. I have thought about your letter perhaps a dozen times in 21 years, Petunia, which I imagine sounds insulting, since you have thought about mine every week. He looked up. The last time I thought about it was the night I put a child on your doorstep, and I did not think, there is a woman who will keep him safe. I thought, there is a woman who will keep him at arm's length, and that will do. And I have never been more usefully wrong in my life, said Dumbledore. Petunia Dursley did not thank him. She was never going to thank him. She sat there in the hospital wing with her hands on her handbag and looked at the boy asleep in the bed. He nearly died in your school, she said. Yes. He will go back in September. Yes. Then you and I, said Petunia, are going to have a much better system. The system lasted 6 weeks, which was longer than I expected. It broke on the 31st of July, 1992, when Harry Potter's 12th birthday was interrupted by a small creature with ears like a bat appearing in the middle of the second bedroom and bursting into tears. Dobby the house elf had come to warn Harry Potter not to return to Hogwarts. He had a speech prepared. He got about 4 sentences into it before the door opened and Petunia Dursley walked in holding a cake with 12 candles on it. There was a silence. Downstairs, said Petunia. Both of you. Kitchen. That is how a house elf came to be sitting on a chair at the kitchen table of number 4, Privet Drive at 9 o'clock at night, with a cup of tea in front of him that he was too frightened to drink. I love this scene more than almost anything else in this timeline, and here is why. Harry asked Dobby the questions a 12-year-old asks. What is going to happen? Who sent you? Why can't you tell me? Petunia asked completely different questions. She had been a receptionist for 4 years. She had spent 4 years getting information out of people who did not want to give it over a counter in 11 minutes while a phone rang. You cannot tell me who your family are, she said. Fine. How many people live in the house? Dobby stared at her. How many rooms is Dobby allowed in? When were you told to come here? Were you told or did you decide? Did you hear it said out loud or did you read it? She had a pen. She was writing. Do not tell me what the danger is. Tell me what month you heard about it. Dobby began to shake and then to cry and then, in between, to answer. Not everything. He punished himself twice by hitting his head on the table leg, and Petunia stopped him both times by simply putting her hand between his forehead and the wood, which nobody in his life had ever done, and which upset him far more than the punishment. What she got in the end was this: that something had been planned for the coming school year, that it had been planned since at least the previous winter, that it involved a thing that had happened before, long ago, and had been stopped and had not been finished, and that the person who had planned it did not know Dobby had come. Then Dobby said he was sorry, and that Harry Potter must be kept safe, and that he had taken the letters. What letters? Said Harry. Harry had written 11 letters that summer to Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger, and had received nothing back, and had spent 6 weeks quietly deciding that his friends had got tired of him over the holidays, which is a thing 12-year-olds are extremely good at deciding. Dobby produced them from inside his pillowcase, a great thick wad of them. And here is where a small kind woman would have been gentle. Petunia Dursley was not a gentle woman. Give them back, she said. Now, and then you're going to listen to me, because I am going to tell you something nobody has ever told you. She crouched down in front of the chair so that her face was level with his. You have come a very long way to save a child's life, and you have done it against orders, and you have done it well. That is not a wicked thing. That is the only decent thing anybody in your house has done this year. Dobby made a noise like a kettle and had to be given a tea towel. He also, before he left, panicking, tried one last time to keep Harry at home and did a piece of magic in the hallway that dropped a light fitting. The Ministry of Magic owl arrived 11 minutes later. It carried an official warning addressed to Harry Potter, informing him that a hover charm had been used at his place of residence. that the use of magic by underage wizards outside school was an offense, and that further activity would result in expulsion. Harry went white. Petunia read it twice, and then said a word that Dudley had learned at the boxing club. The letter she wrote back to the improper use of magic office that night ran to 3 pages and included the sentences, "You have detected magic in my house," and concluded that it was performed by the only person in the house who cannot yet legally perform it, and "I would like the name of the person who made that determination, and I would like to know what other conclusions your department reaches by counting the children in a room." She got a form letter back. She wrote again. She got a slightly different form letter. She wrote a third time to a man called Cornelius Fudge, and she got no reply at all, and she wrote that down on the back of the 1987 Grunning's desk calendar with the date. Cornelius Fudge did not know it, but he had just made an enemy who kept files. And she wrote to Dumbledore. Of course, she wrote to Dumbledore. She told him everything Dobby had said, in order, with dates, and she asked him one question at the end, something that happened before and was stopped and was not finished. What was it? Dumbledore's reply took 8 days, which was the longest he had ever taken, and it said that the matter was being looked into, that he did not wish to alarm her on the basis of an elf's warning, and that Harry would be watched. He was watched. It made no difference at all. I am not going to walk you through that whole year, because you know it, and because the interesting part is what it looked like from a kitchen in Surrey. It looked like letters. October. Somebody has written on a wall in blood. A cat has been petrified. Everyone is talking about a chamber of secrets. November. 2 more. A first year and a ghost, which apparently is possible. Harry can talk to snakes, and did it in front of the entire school by accident. And now every single person in that castle thinks he is the one doing it. Petunia read that letter 3 times. Then she wrote back, and the reply she sent has, I think, the best 4 sentences of her entire life in it. They have decided you are the monster because you are the only interesting explanation available, she wrote. That is not evidence. That is laziness. You will find people prefer a story that already exists to a fact they have to go and look for. And there is nothing you can do about that except keep a note of who said what and be surprised at absolutely nobody afterwards. Keep your head, wash your socks. December. Hermione has worked something out and will not say what. February. A diary. It writes back. Harry, who was 12 and who had been told since he was 7 that magic was real and wonderful, thought a book that answered him was interesting. Petunia thought it was a stranger talking to a child in a locked room. Her letter went out the same day. Burn it. Do not write in it again. Do not ask it another question. Take it to a teacher tonight, and if you will not do that, then put it in a fire and tell me you have done it. It arrived on the 11th of February. Harry had already been robbed of it. Somebody had taken it out of his dormitory 4 days earlier. March. Hermione and a girl called Penelope, both petrified. April. Hagrid has been taken to a prison called Azkaban, and nobody thinks he did it, and they have taken him anyway. Dumbledore has been removed from the school by the governors. Petunia Dursley put down that letter and sat at her kitchen table for a long time. Then she wrote to Albus Dumbledore at whatever address he was now at, and she wrote the letter she had been not writing since August. You told me in November that the matter was being looked into. 5 children are in a hospital wing. A man is in a prison without a trial. You have been thrown out of your own school. I do not think you are lazy, and I do not think you are a fool. So I am left with the third possibility, which is that you knew what this was in November and decided that telling me would be inconvenient. I have kept my part. Now I have written to you for 7 years, and I have never once lied to you. Do not make me the last person you tell. She did not get an answer, because on the day it arrived, the Chamber of Secrets was opened for the last time, and a first-year girl called Ginny Weasley was taken down into it. You know what happened? Harry went. Ron went with him. Gilderoy Lockhart lost his memory to a broken wand, and a ceiling came down and split the tunnel in two, and Harry Potter went on alone into a chamber under a school with a diary in his pocket. A basilisk, a phoenix, a hat, a sword, a fang through a book. He came out of it with a girl who could not stop crying and a hole in his arm that should have killed him. And there is nothing I can add to that. Here is what happened afterwards. 2 letters arrived at number 4, Privet Drive, on the 10th of June, 1993. The first was from Harry, and it was 1 page, and it was the shortest letter he ever sent her, because he was 12 and he did not have the words yet. The second was from a woman called Molly Weasley, whom Petunia had never met. It said that her daughter was alive. It said that a boy had gone down a hole in the ground for a girl he had spoken to about 4 times. It said that Mrs. Weasley did not know how to write this letter and had started it 6 times, and that she understood Mrs. Dursley had brought that boy up on her own, and that she would like, if it was ever wanted, to shake her hand. Petunia read it in the hall. Then she went into the kitchen and closed the door, and Dudley, who was upstairs, heard something he had heard perhaps twice in his life, which was his mother crying where she thought nobody could hear. And then Harry came home for the summer, and Petunia Dursley did the worst thing she ever did to him. He had been home for 4 days. He had not been sleeping. He came down at 2 in the morning for water and found her at the kitchen table with the calendar and the tin of letters open in front of her, and he sat down, and she asked him a question about the chamber, and he answered it honestly, and the answer contained the phrase, "So I went in." And Petunia said, "You went in. There wasn't anyone else. There is a castle full of adults. They didn't know where it was. I did. So you went into a hole in the ground, alone, at 12 years old," said his aunt, and her voice was going up, and she could hear it going up and could not stop it, "with a sword to fight a snake because you knew where it was." "Aunt Petunia, your mother died for you," said Petunia Dursley. "She stood in a doorway, and she died so that you could exist, and you throw it away twice a year for people you have known for 18 months. What do you imagine that is worth? What do you think I'm supposed to do with that?" The kitchen went very quiet. "You are supposed to be pleased that Ginny Weasley is alive," said Harry. He went upstairs. She did not follow him. She sat there until it got light, and then she went up and knocked on the door of the second bedroom and stood in the doorway and said the 6 hardest words available to a proud woman. "That was unforgivable. I am sorry." "It's all right." "It is not all right, and I would like you to stop saying that things are all right the moment somebody in this house is upset," said Petunia. "You have been doing it since you were 4, and I have let you, and it was easier for me, and that was coward. I am not sorry that I was frightened. I am sorry I made it your fault." Harry Potter looked at her for a long moment. "Did you mean it?" he said. "About my mother, that I'm wasting it." "No," said Petunia. "I meant that you look like her when you have decided something, and I have seen where that ended once, and I am not strong enough to see it twice." She stood in the doorway in her dressing gown. "But I am going to have to be, aren't I?" "Probably," said Harry. "Yes," said his aunt. "I thought so. Come down, there's toast." The summer of 1993 was the summer the man on the news. He was on at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday in July, in between an item about a heat wave and an item about a lorry. A photograph filled the screen, a gaunt face with long matted hair and eyes like 2 holes. "Sirius Black," said the newsreader. "Escaped murderer. Members of the public should not approach." Petunia Dursley put down a plate because she had seen that face before. In 1978, on a hot evening in Cokeworth, when a motorbike had come down the middle of Spinner's End with 2 19-year-old boys on it, and one of them had been James Potter, and the other one had been laughing so hard he could barely hold on, and both of them had come up the path to collect Lily, and had been charming and appalling in equal measure, and had left tire marks on the pavement that Petunia had scrubbed for an hour. She had thought about that evening for 15 years, always with a hot flush of embarrassment because she had been 20 and had said something snide about the motorbike, and the dark-haired one had turned round and looked at her, and had not said anything, and somehow that had been worse. She knew that face. She was, as far as I can work out, the only Muggle in Britain who did. She did not tell Harry. That was a decision, and she made it consciously, standing in her kitchen with her hand on a plate. She wrote to Dumbledore instead, that night, and asked one question. Who is Sirius Black, and what was he to my sister? Dumbledore's answer was the most careful letter he ever wrote to her, and it was still not careful enough, because Petunia read it 4 times and found the gap. He told her Black had been James Potter's closest friend. He told her Black had been made the Potters' secret keeper, the one person alive who could give away where they were hiding. He told her Black had betrayed them to Lord Voldemort, and had then murdered 12 people in a street in broad daylight, and had been sent to Azkaban. He did not tell her there had been a trial. Petunia Dursley wrote back a 2-line letter. You have described a conviction and not a trial. Which was it? Dumbledore's reply was 1 word long, and it took him 5 days to send it, and the word was neither. Harry went back to school in September. There were Dementors on the train, because Azkaban had been emptied of patients and its guards were out looking, and one of them opened the compartment door, and Harry Potter heard a woman screaming for the first time in his conscious life. He knew whose voice it was straight away. That is the part that broke him. He had spent 6 years being told the story, and now he had the sound. He wrote about it, of course he did. And Petunia, who had never heard her sister scream and now knew that her nephew had sat with that letter for 2 days before she could reply, and what she finally wrote was, learn to make it stop. Ask the new teacher. Do not simply endure it. That is what I did, and it does not work. He asked the new teacher, Professor Remus Lupin, who had known his parents and who taught him, over 4 months, to produce a Patronus. It came out as a stag. Harry did not know why until Lupin told him, and then he sat down on the floor of an empty classroom and put his head in his hands, and Lupin looked away and let him. There was a black dog in the garden of number 4, Privet Drive, that winter. It came in October, and it was enormous and filthy and thin enough to count. It sat by the back fence. Petunia, who did not like animals and had said so for 35 years, put out a bowl of scraps on the second night because it was raining, and she had had a nephew arrive on her doorstep in the rain once, and the thought would not leave her alone. It came back most weeks until March. She named it nothing. She talked to it, occasionally, through the back door, in the way people do talk to animals, and once, in January, after a very bad letter from Scotland about a Quidditch match and a fall of 50 feet, she stood in the doorway in her dressing gown and told a stray dog everything she had not told anybody in 12 years. The dog put its head on its paws and did not move. I want to be exact about this because it matters. Sirius Black did not come to Privet Drive to comfort Petunia Dursley. He came because it was the one place on earth that his godson was, and he had been in Azkaban for 12 years, and he could not stay away. And he wanted to see the house where the Dursleys were keeping James Potter's son. And what he expected to find was a cold house with a cupboard in it. What he found was a woman who put out food in the rain. He came back in the spring, and by then he had other business, and you know how that ended. The Shrieking Shack, June 1994. Ron Weasley dragged into a tunnel with a broken leg, Hermione Granger and Harry Potter going in after him. A man everybody in Britain believed to be a murderer, standing in a ruined room, saying that he had never betrayed anybody. And a rat. Peter Pettigrew had been asleep in Ron Weasley's dormitory for 3 years, and had been Percy Weasley's before that, and had been a Weasley family pet for 12 years. And that is one of the ugliest facts in this entire story in any version of it. He confessed. He was made to, with 2 wands on him. He admitted the secret keeper switch. He admitted the street and the 12 dead muggles and the finger he had cut off his own hand. And Harry Potter stood there and understood, all at once, that the man in front of him had sold his mother's address for his own life, and had then spent 12 years asleep on a boy's pillow. They did not kill him. Harry stopped them. He said Pettigrew should go to the castle, and then to the Dementors, and that his father would not have wanted 2 of his friends to become murderers over him. They took him out of the tunnel alive, and in chains, and with witnesses. And then the clouds moved, and the moon came out, full and white, over the forbidden forest. And Remus Lupin had not taken his potion that evening, because he had been watching a map instead. Everything after that took 90 seconds. Lupin transformed. Sirius Black changed into the great black dog to hold him off. Peter Pettigrew, in the confusion, with nobody holding the chain, became a rat again and went into the grass. And he was gone. He was always going to be gone. That is the thing about this story that no timeline fixes. The one piece of evidence that could have cleared Sirius Black went into the long grass at Hogwarts on the 6th of June, 1994, in every version of every world, because a man forgot to drink a potion while he was busy saving 3 children. Sirius Black went over the wall on a stolen hippogriff at midnight and was a wanted man again by morning. And on the 2nd of August, 1994, Petunia Dursley came downstairs at 5:30 in the morning because there was somebody in her kitchen and found a thin man in stolen clothes sitting at her table with his hands flat on the wood where she could see them. "I am not going to hurt anybody," said Sirius Black. "I know what you have seen on your television. I would like 11 minutes, and then I will go. And if you want to scream first, scream, and I will still be sitting here when they arrive." Petunia Dursley looked at him for a long, long moment. Then she said, "You have been eating out of a bowl in my garden since October." "Yes, there is a chicken in the fridge," said Petunia. "Sit down properly. You look like a coat rack." They talked for 2 hours. Harry slept through the first one, upstairs, with no idea that his godfather was under the same roof. Petunia made Sirius Black eat a cold chicken leg and half a loaf and drink 3 cups of tea, and while he ate, she took him through it, in order, with dates, the way she had taken Dobby through it 2 years earlier. When were you made secret keeper? Who suggested the switch? Who knew about the switch? Who arrested you? Who questioned you? Who signed the committal? Nobody signed anything. That was the answer to the last one. Nobody signed anything, because there had not been a hearing, because it had been the 1st of November, 1981, and the wizarding world had wanted somebody to be guilty by lunchtime. "Bartemius Crouch sent me straight through," said Sirius Black. "I did not see a courtroom. I was in a cell in Azkaban within about a day. For 12 years. For 12 years, Petunia Dursley wrote that down. "I want to be clear about something," she said. "I do not like you. I met you once, and you were showing off on a motorbike, and you left tire marks on a pavement I had to scrub. I have thought about that evening for 16 years, and I have never once come out of it well." She put the pen down. "I have also just spent 20 minutes listening to a man tell me he was locked in a prison for over a decade without anybody writing his name on a piece of paper, and I find that I mind that a great deal more than I mind the motorbike. Do you believe me?" "I believe there was no trial," said Petunia. "That is not the same thing. I will believe the rest when I have a reason to." "Fair," said Sirius. Then Harry came down at 7:30 and stopped dead in the kitchen doorway. I am not going to try to write what that morning was like for a 14-year-old boy, because I do not think I can. He had a godfather. He had had one for 2 months, and had never been in a room with him without somebody trying to kill somebody. And now the man was sitting at his aunt's kitchen table eating toast with his elbows on the wood like he had been doing it for years. They were in there most of the day. Sirius told him about James at school and about Lily, who had not been able to stand James for 4 years and had said so loudly and often, and Harry laughed until his eyes watered. And in the afternoon, in the back garden, Sirius Black asked him to come and live with him. It was not a fair question, and Sirius knew it was not fair, which is why he asked it in the garden instead of at the table. He said he had a house. He said it was hidden and horrible, and that Harry could have any room in it. He said, and this is exactly how he put it, "You do not have to stay somewhere out of gratitude." Harry Potter, aged 14, stood on the lawn at number 4, Privet Drive, and looked at the back of the house and at the window of the yellow bedroom on the first floor. "It's not gratitude," he said. "Harry, you think she took me in because she had to?" Harry turned round. "She didn't. Her husband left. She sold the sofa. She's been on a reception desk for 6 years, and she won't touch my money because she thinks the second she takes any of it, everyone in that street gets to say she did it for the money." He was going red. "She's not somewhere I'm staying. She's my aunt." There was a silence. "Right," said Sirius Black. "Sorry." "You can come back, though," said Harry. "She likes you more than she says. She's like that with everyone." And Sirius Black, who had lost everybody he had ever had, stood in a Surrey garden in August and was told that he could come back and had to look at the fence for a while. He came back 4 times over the next 2 years. Every time, as a dog, through the back gate. And every time Petunia Dursley put out a plate and complained about the mud on the lino. And every time she left the back door on the latch afterwards, for a week, in case he needed it. You know what happens next? I wish it were not so. The 4th year was the Triwizard Tournament, and a boy of 14 had his name come out of a goblet that should not have taken it, and had to fight a dragon, and had to go into a lake, and had to walk into a hedge maze in June with the whole school watching. Harry wrote home about every part of it. Petunia's letters that year got shorter and shorter, because there was less and less she could usefully say, and the last one before the 3rd task said only this: "You did not enter yourself, and everybody who says otherwise is a coward. Come home on the 25th, there will be a cake, and it will be a bad one. The 24th of June, 1995. A cup in the middle of a maze that was not a cup. A graveyard in Little Hangleton. A boy of 17 called Cedric Diggory, who had run the whole way with Harry and had said, 'Take it together,' and who was killed where he stood by a man he had never met, for no reason at all except that he was standing there. Bone of the father, flesh of the servant, blood of the enemy, taken by force from the arm of a boy tied to a headstone. Lord Voldemort came back into the world at about 1 in the morning on the 25th of June, 1995, and the first thing he did was call his friends, and the second thing he did was tell them a joke about a mother's love. And then he raised his wand. Here is where an old man in a shop in Diagon Alley pays off 4 years later. The 2 wands were brothers. They came from the same bird, and they would not fight properly. And when the spells met in the air between them, they locked instead of striking, and a thread of golden light joined them, and out of the tip of the yew wand came the echoes of the last things it had killed. Cedric Diggory first, whole and standing, asking to be taken back to his parents, then an old man, then a young woman with long dark hair, and then James Potter, and then Lily. They stayed as long as they could. They told him to hold on. His mother told him to let go when he was ready and get to the cup, and she stood between him and the thing in the graveyard one more time, which is the only thing she had ever done in his presence. He got to the cup. He took Cedric Diggory's body with him, because he was not going to leave a boy of 17 in a field. and the two of them arrived in the middle of a stadium full of cheering. I will not go through the rest of that night. Barty Crouch the Younger and the Flask, and Dumbledore and the Minister for Magic having the argument that split Britain in two, and Cornelius Fudge standing in a hospital wing and deciding, out loud, that he did not believe it. Harry Potter came home on the 25th of June, 1995, on the train, in the afternoon, with his trunk. Petunia was at the barrier. She saw his face from about 30 feet away and knew and started walking before he did. He did not cry until they were on the underground. Then he cried for about 40 minutes on the Circle line into his aunt's shoulder, while she said nothing at all and glared at anybody who looked, and a woman opposite offered a tissue and got the full force of Petunia Dursley's face and put it away again. That summer was very bad. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He got no news at all because everybody who might have written to him had been told not to put anything in writing. And so for 6 weeks, the only information Harry Potter had about the return of Lord Voldemort was a rolled-up copy of the Daily Prophet that arrived every morning and did not mention it once. He sat in the garden. He got thin. Petunia went to Wisteria Walk twice a week and came back with nothing. And Dudley Dursley, 15 years old, 6 foot and a stone of it in the shoulders, watched his cousin sit in a garden for 6 weeks and did not know what to do about it and got it wrong for the first month. Then, on a Tuesday in the middle of July, he sat down on the grass next to him. Who was he then? Said Dudley. What? The boy. The one who died. Mum said there was a boy. Harry looked at him. Cedric, he said. He was 17. He played Quidditch. He was, I don't know, he was really decent. That's the thing about him. He was just really decent. Right? Said Dudley. They sat there for a while. Was it your fault? Said Dudley. Dudley. I'm not having a go, I'm asking. Dudley pulled up a handful of grass. Because you've been out here for a month looking like it was, and if it was, fine. Say it, and if it wasn't, I don't know. Stop it. Harry Potter opened his mouth and found that there was nothing to put in it. That was the moment if you want one, not later, not the big one, that one, on a lawn, from a boy who had bitten him when they were both 18 months old. The 2nd of August, 1995, about 9 in the evening. Harry and Dudley were walking back from Magnolia Crescent, arguing about nothing, when every light in the alley went out and the air went cold enough to hurt. 2 Dementors, in little whinging, miles from anywhere they had any business being. Dudley could not see them. That is the worst part. He could not see them and he could feel them. And whatever the worst thing in Dudley Dursley's head was, it came out and stood in front of him in the dark. And he went down on his knees in an alley with his hands over his ears. Harry Potter cast a Patronus in front of a Muggle in a public alleyway in Surrey, and a silver stag drove 2 Dementors out of Little Whinging and up over the rooftops. And then the lights came back on and the world was normal, and his cousin was on the ground shaking. He got him home. It took 20 minutes because Dudley could barely walk. Petunia opened the front door and saw one boy holding the other one up and went absolutely white. And then the owl came, and it was from the Ministry of Magic, and it said that Harry Potter had been expelled from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry for performing the Patronus charm in the presence of a Muggle, and that officials would arrive shortly to destroy his wand. Petunia Dursley read that letter standing in her own hallway, with her 15-year-old son on the floor behind her, and something in her that had been coiling up since 1981, finally, completely, let go. Get me a pen, she said. The hearing was on the 12th of August, 1995 at 8 in the morning, in courtroom 10, in the oldest and lowest part of the Ministry of Magic, in front of the full Wizengamot in plum-colored robes. They had moved it. They had moved it that morning, from a small office at 9 to the criminal court at 8, on purpose, to make sure that a boy of 15 arrived alone and late. He did not arrive alone. Harry Potter came into courtroom 10 with his aunt on one side of him and Arabella Figg on the other, and behind them, arriving at a dead run with his hat on crooked, Albus Dumbledore. Cornelius Fudge looked at Petunia and said, "Who is this?" "I am the boy's guardian," said Petunia Dursley. "You are a muggle." "I am both," said Petunia. "It is possible to be two things. I have brought a note. I have loved this scene for years, and I still do not think I can do it justice." She had brought a folder. It was a Grunning's ring binder from 1987 that had been in a cupboard under the stairs since the year her husband left. It had dividers in it. It had dates. Fudd tried to have her removed. Amelia Bones, who was the head of magical law enforcement and who did not like a court being moved at 7:30 in the morning, said, in a voice like a dropped brick, that the court would hear the Guardian. So the Wizengamot of Great Britain heard Petunia Dursley. She did not raise her voice once. She did not use one word of magical vocabulary, because she did not have any, and it turned out to be the most effective decision anybody made that morning. She read out the date of the attack, and the time, and the location, and the temperature. She read out what her son could and could not see. She described, in flat, precise, receptionist's English, exactly what a 15-year-old boy with no magic in him looked like on the ground in an alleyway, and she did not stop when a woman in the third row put her hand over her mouth. Then she said this, "I have been sent one letter by your ministry every time a magical event has occurred within 100 yards of my house since 1992. I have 3 of them here. Not one has ever asked whether the children in that house were safe. They have only ever asked who was responsible. On the 2nd of August, 2 of your prison guards came off their leash and walked into a residential street in Surrey, and my nephew put them back over the rooftops, and your first act as a government was to send him a letter telling him he was expelled. So I will ask the question your letters never asked. Who sent them?" The courtroom went absolutely silent. "That is not the matter before us," said Cornelius Fudge. "It is the only matter," said Petunia Dursley. "You have brought a boy to a criminal court at 8 in the morning for saving his cousin's life. If you are able to bring him here, you are able to find out who sent them, unless you already know." Harry was cleared, not because of her in the end, but because Arabella Figg had seen the Dementors and Amelia Bones believed her, and because Dumbledore quoted the clause about life-threatening situations, and because Fudge could count, cleared of all charges by a majority. But I want you to see what else happened in that room, because it is the price of this entire timeline, and it is standing at the back in an expensive traveling cloak with a silver-topped cane. Lucius Malfoy was in the Ministry of Magic on the 12th of August, 1995. He was upstairs and he came down because there was a rumor that Dumbledore was in the building. He stood at the back of courtroom 10 for 4 minutes, and what he saw was not a boy. Every dark wizard in Britain already knew about the boy. What he saw was a muggle woman in a good coat with a ring binder, who had walked into the Ministry of Magic to stand in front of 50 judges for Harry Potter, and who had made the minister sweat. He wrote to his master that night. For 14 years, Lord Voldemort had known that Harry Potter lived with muggle relatives and had dismissed it entirely, because he could not conceive of a muggle being worth anything to anybody, least of all to a wizard. That was the last day he thought that. The 5th year was the year of the woman in pink. Dolores Umbridge came to Hogwarts to make sure nobody said out loud what everybody had started to suspect, and she did it with rules and forms and a quill that wrote in blood, and Harry Potter spent most of that autumn with the back of his hand raw. He did not write home about the quill. That was his decision, and it was the wrong one, and he made it for the most understandable reason in the world, which was that he could imagine exactly what his aunt would do, and he could also imagine what would happen to her when she did it. Petunia found out in December from Hermione Granger in a letter that Hermione agonized over for 9 days and sent anyway, because Hermione Granger has never in her life been able to leave a wrong thing alone. The letter that went from little whinging to the Ministry of Magic about Dolores Umbridge is, I am told, still in a file somewhere. It achieved absolutely nothing. Not everything Petunia did work. Most of it did not. That is what it is like to be a muggle with a nephew in a war, and she kept doing it anyway, which is the point. That was also the year of the room on the 7th floor, and the 28 students who met in it, and Neville Longbottom, who could not manage a disarming charm in October, and who, by March, was teaching it to third years. I want to say Neville's name properly here because in June, he was one of 6 people who walked into the Department of Mysteries, and he was the last one still standing next to Harry at the end of it, with a broken nose and a broken wand, refusing to say a word that a Death Eater wanted to hear. The 18th of June, 1996. A vision that was not true. A department full of glass spheres. A prophecy record that shattered on the floor before anybody could hear it. 9 Death Eaters, and then the Order of the Phoenix. And then a duel in front of a stone archway with a veil hanging in it. Sirius Black was laughing when it happened. That is the detail that finished Harry. He was laughing because he had spent 12 years in a cell and 1 year in his mother's house, and about 4 hours of that entire time actually fighting, and he was happy. He went through the veil, and he did not come out. Harry Potter came home on the last day of June, 1996, and this time he did not cry on the underground. He did not do anything. For 9 days he did not do anything at all. He got up, and he sat, and he went to bed. Petunia watched it happening and recognized it. Because she had done exactly the same thing in November 1981 with a toddler on her hip and a husband who would not speak to her, and she knew precisely how long a person can stay in that room. On the 10th day she went up and sat on the end of his bed and said, "Tell me about him, not the end of it, the rest." And Harry told her about a man who had escaped from a wizarding prison because he had seen a photograph in a newspaper and had come to Surrey and had eaten out of a bowl in her garden in the rain. They talked for 4 hours, and somewhere in the middle of it, he told her the other thing. The thing Dumbledore had told him in a wrecked office at midnight, because he had been carrying it for 2 weeks and it was too heavy to hold on his own. There had been a prophecy, made before he was born, about a boy born as the 7th month died, who would have the power to finish Lord Voldemort. Voldemort had heard half of it and had chosen which boy it meant, and he had chosen wrong, or he had chosen right, and either way he had made it true by choosing. Neither can live while the other survives. Petunia Dursley sat on the end of the bed in the second bedroom of number 4, Privet Drive, and got her answer. The one she had asked Albus Dumbledore 4 times in 4 different ways between 1985 and 1989, and had stopped asking in 1990 and had started counting instead. Why her house? Why her sister? Out of every house in Britain. Because a woman in a pub had said something she did not remember saying, and a man had heard half of it through a door. That is it, she said. That is the reason? That's the reason. There is no reason at all, said Petunia. It is a coin. Yeah. She sat there for a long time. Then we had better be very good at this, she said. Now, Harry Potter made a decision in the summer of 1996, and I want to be fair to him, because it was a brave decision, and it came from love, and it was completely, catastrophically wrong. He stopped writing home. Not entirely. He sent 3 lines a fortnight about the weather and homework and nothing else. No names, no details, nothing that could be intercepted, because he had worked out what Lucius Malfoy had seen in courtroom 10, and he had spent a summer imagining it. He thought that if the Death Eaters believed his aunt was nothing to him, they would leave her alone. Petunia knew exactly what he was doing by the 3rd letter. She wrote back a long one. She wrote back another long one. Then she stopped too because she was not going to spend the year begging a 16-year-old for scraps. And because she had her pride, and because for the first time since 1988 the two of them were being stupid at each other. from a distance. They lost 8 months. That is what it cost. 8 months of the last 2 years they had spent writing about the weather, and it did not work. It was never going to work. It did not fail because of anything Harry did wrong. It failed because Lord Voldemort had been alive again for 18 months, and he had never once needed a letter to tell him where Harry Potter's family lived. The 19th of February, 1997. About 4 in the morning, 6 Death Eaters came into Privet Drive from the Magnolia Crescent end, on foot, in silence, and they came for the house. They could not get in. That is the whole of what the protection did, and it did it perfectly. Lily Evans had died in a doorway in 1981, and for 15 years, there had been a line across the front step of number 4 that nobody who served Lord Voldemort could cross while the boy called it home. So they stood in the road, and they took the street apart instead. Arabella Figg came out of her own house on Wisteria Walk in a dressing gown and slippers with a wand she had never in her life been able to use, because she had been sitting up watching, as she had sat up watching for 15 years, and she was the only person awake in Little Whinging who knew what she was looking at. She could not fight. She was a squib. She had no magic at all. What she had was a mouth, and about 90 seconds, and she stood in the middle of Privet Drive and shouted the alarm charm that Dumbledore had given her in 1981 and had never expected her to need, and it went up over the rooftops of Surrey like a flare. Daedalus Diggle and Hestia Jones came through 14 seconds later. Kingsley Shacklebolt came a moment after that. They saved the street. They did not save her. Arabella Doreen Figg died in the road outside number 6, Privet Drive on the 19th of February, 1997, in her slippers, having got everybody else out of bed in time. She had been paid nothing. She had asked for nothing. She had spent 15 years minding 2 boys on bank holidays and Christmas Eve, and at 2 hours' notice on a wet Thursday, and she had never once forgotten which of them took sugar. Harry got a letter at Hogwarts the next morning. It was 4 pages, and it was in his aunt's handwriting, and the first line was, "Everybody in this house is alive." He read the first line and had to sit down on the stairs. They wrote every day after that, every single day for the rest of the year, and neither of them ever mentioned the 8 months again, because they did not have to. That is what the 8 months bought. That is all they bought. There was one more thing in those letters, and Petunia never fully understood it, because Harry was under instructions and did not explain. All that year, Dumbledore had been taking him out of lessons and into an office, and putting him headfirst into a stone basin full of other people's memories. A shop girl, an orphanage, a boy called Tom Riddle, who had asked a teacher a question about souls in 1943 and been given an answer. By spring, Harry Potter knew that Lord Voldemort had done something to himself that nobody in the last 1,000 years had done, and that he had done it more than once, and that until every piece of it was found and destroyed, the man could not die. Petunia only ever got one line about it. "There are things he left behind, and we have to find them," Harry wrote, "and I cannot say what they are." And she wrote back, "Then find out how many, because I have never once seen you plan for a number you did not know." Severus Snape came to Privet Drive on the 3rd of March, 1997. He came on Dumbledore's business to renew what could be renewed and check what could be checked, and he was there for 50 minutes, and for 40 of them, he was in the front garden being unpleasant about the state of the hedge. For the other 10, he was in the kitchen. "You are Lily's sister," he said. "Yes." "You were vile to her." "Yes," said Petunia Dursley. "I was." "Sit down, you are letting the cold in." He did not sit down. He stood in the middle of her kitchen in a black coat and said, "I have written you 3 letters in 6 years. I did not send any of them." "Why?" "Because there was nothing in them that was any use to you," said Severus Snape. "They were all the same letter. They all said, 'Keep him at home.'" Petunia looked at him for a while. "There is something in a drawer in this kitchen," she said, "that my sister wrote in October 1981 and never posted. I am not going to show it to you, but there are 2 sentences in it about you, and I have thought about whether to tell you what they are since you walked up my path, and I have decided that I will, because I do not think anybody has told you a kind thing in 20 years, and it is beginning to show. I do not want," he began. "She wrote that she saw you once in a shop 3 or 4 years before," said Petunia. "She wrote that she did not speak to you, and she wrote that she had thought about it every week since and had never decided whether she had done the right thing." The kitchen was very quiet. "That is not forgiveness," said Snape. "No," said Petunia. "It is worse. It is that she never stopped weighing it." She put the kettle down. "I know exactly what that is like, Mr. Snape, because I did the same thing about her for years and years. And then somebody left a baby on my step, and I ran out of time to decide. Severus Snape left number 4, Privet Drive, 4 minutes later without saying goodbye. He came back twice more that year to check the protections, and both times Petunia put out a cup, and both times he did not touch it, and the second time he took it as far as picking it up. On the 30th of June, 1997, Albus Dumbledore died on the astronomy tower at Hogwarts. His hand had been dead and black since the previous summer, from a ring he should not have put on. There had been a boy in that school all year with an impossible task, and a mother who had begged. And there had been a promise, made in a Scottish wood a year earlier, between Dumbledore and the one man he trusted to end it cleanly, rather than let a 16-year-old become a murderer. All 3 of those things arrived at the top of the same tower on the same night. Harry Potter watched it from the bottom of a staircase, unable to move under a cloak. And afterwards he could not tell anybody what the worst part had been. The funeral was on the 4th of July. There was a white tomb by the lake. Petunia Dursley was not there. She had not been invited and would not have gone. She heard about it in a letter sitting at her kitchen table in Little Whinging, and she read it twice. And then she went and got the biscuit tin from behind the tea towels and put it on the table and opened it. 11 years of letters. Green ink on paper like cloth. Hundreds of them, in order, because she was a woman who kept things in order. She sat there most of the night. She did not cry, and she did not burn them. And when Dudley came down at 2 in the morning for a glass of water, he found his mother reading a letter from 1988 with her hand over her mouth. "Who was he?" said Dudley. "He was the man who told me no," said Petunia Dursley. "When I was 13, she put the letter back in the tin. And then he spent 11 years answering every single question I ever asked him, and he never once asked me for anything in return, and I never thanked him, and now I cannot." "Would you have?" said Dudley. "Thanked him?" "No," said his mother. "Well then," said Dudley Dursley, and went back to bed. The 27th of July, 1997. Harry Potter turned 17 in 4 days. On the moment of his birthday, the protection would end, because the charm had been built to last exactly as long as his childhood, and not 1 hour more, and the whole of Little Whinging had to be empty before that. 2 members of the order came for the Dursleys at 6 in the evening. Daedalus Diggle, who was so nervous he shook hands with the coat stand, and Hestia Jones, who had been in Privet Drive on the night in February and did not smile once the entire time she was there. There was a car in the road outside. It was not the order's car. Vernon Dursley had driven down from Coventry. I do not know how she got word to him. I have thought about it for a long time, and my best guess is a phone box and about 4 pence. But he came, and he came the same day, and he stood on the pavement by his own front gate for 9 years to the month after he had walked out of it with his hands behind his back, looking at ahead. He did not come inside. He did not speak to Harry. What he did do, when Hestia Jones explained that the family would need to travel a long way and be hidden, was say, "Right," and open the boot and put in 2 suitcases and a box of Petunia's things, and check the tire pressure twice, because Vernon Dursley in a crisis became a man who checked tire pressure. Then he stood by the car door, and Harry came down the path with the last bag, and the two of them were about 4 feet apart for the first time since 1988. Vernon Dursley looked at the head. "Your aunt," he said, "is a very stubborn woman." "I know," said Harry. "Yes. Well," Vernon cleared his throat twice. "That is the situation. That is everything Vernon Dursley ever said to Harry Potter about any of it. And it is not enough and it is not nothing, and he drove them 400 miles that night and stayed with them for the whole of the war and slept on a camp bed in a rented cottage in the north of Scotland for 10 months. And he never once complained about it where anybody could hear. Dudley was harder to get out of the house. He stood in the hall with his arms folded and asked where Harry was going, and got told, and asked why Harry was not coming with them, and got told that, and then said, "That's rubbish." Dudley, "No, it's rubbish. We're getting a car and a house and 2 people with wands, and he stopped and did the maths on his own face and got the answer. Dudley Dursley, 17 years old, put out his hand. "You looked after me," he said, "in the alley. When I was on the floor and you couldn't see anything either. You could have run." "You're my cousin," said Harry. "Yeah," said Dudley. "Took me about 15 years to work out what that meant though, didn't it?" They shook hands. It went on slightly too long and both of them let it. And then everybody was outside and the hall was empty and there were 2 people left in the house at number 4, Privet Drive. Petunia Dursley went into the kitchen and opened the drawer under the cutlery and took out a tin, and out of the tin she took a single folded sheet of paper that had been carried in an apron pocket, and the lining of a handbag, and the back of a cupboard for 15 years and 9 months. "I have been deciding when to give you this since you were 9, she said. "I have got it wrong about 400 times. Today it is either now or never, so it is now." Harry took it. He saw the handwriting and his hands stopped working properly. "It came with you," said Petunia. "On the step. She wrote it in October in that village. She never sent it. Dumbledore found it in the house, and he did not read it, and he put it with you." "Why didn't you?" he started. "Because it is the only thing of hers I had," said Petunia Dursley. "And I am not a good person, Harry. I am only a stubborn one, and I wanted it. And every year I told myself you were too young, and every year that got less true, and now you are 17, and there is a car outside." She put her hands flat on the counter. "Read it in the car. Not now. I cannot watch you read it. I have wanted to see your face while you read it for 15 years, and now I find I would rather die." He read it in the car. "I'm not going to give you all of it, because it was 2 pages, and most of it was ordinary, and the ordinary parts were the worst. Lily Potter had written about a baby who would not sleep unless somebody hummed. She had written that he had a temper on him and had thrown a bowl at a wall. She had written that she was going out of her mind in a house she was not allowed to leave. She had written this, "Tuny, I have started this 6 times, and I do not know if I will send. You have not written to me in 7 years, and I have not written to you in 6, and I have decided about 11 times that the next move is yours, and I am tired of being the one who decided that. I am not asking you for anything. I want that to be clear, because if this reaches you, it will probably reach you at a bad moment, and I will not have you thinking that I only wrote because I wanted something. There is a man who wants my son. I will not explain, because you would not thank me for it, and because I have signed things. If it comes to it, I am going to stand in the door. I want you to know that this will not be bravery. Everybody will say it was brave. Afterwards, if there is an afterwards, and it will not be true. It will simply be the only thing I can think of to do, and I will do it because there is nothing else in the room. You would do the same. That is the thing I have never been able to say to you, Tuny, and it is why I am so angry with you all the time. You would do exactly the same, and you have spent your whole life pretending you would not. Look after yourself. Look after Dudley. I saw the photograph in your Christmas card, and he has your chin. Poor child. Lily. Harry Potter read that letter in the back of a car on the main road out of Little Whinging on the 27th of July, 1997. And then he folded it up and put it in his jacket, and he carried it for the next 10 months through everything that happened. Now, the year. I am going to tell it fast, because it went fast and because it was mostly hunger and cold and nothing happening, which is what a war actually is. 7 Potters over Surrey, and Mad-Eye Moody dead before midnight. A wedding at the Burrow that ended with the lights going out. The Ministry of Magic falling in a single afternoon in September. 3 17-year-olds in a tent, moving every few days with an object round one of their necks that made them cruel to each other by degrees. Ron Weasley left in October. He came back in December through a frozen wood, and he pulled Harry out of a pool of freezing water, and then he destroyed the thing round his own neck while it showed him every fear he had. And if you ever hear anybody call Ron Weasley the funny one, tell them about that. Hermione Granger kept all 3 of them alive for 10 months and was the one who worked out what the sword was for, and the one who worked out what the symbol meant, and the one who, in a cellar in a house in Wiltshire in March, lay on a stone floor and refused to give a straight answer to a woman who was torturing her. And it was a house elf who got them out. Dobby came for them in that cellar because Harry Potter had once been given a cup of tea at a kitchen table in Surrey and had not been able to shut up about it afterwards. He got 7 people out of Malfoy Manor, and he died on a beach in Cornwall with a knife in him in Harry's arms, and Harry Potter dug his grave by hand with a spade because he could not stand the thought of doing it with a wand. There is a stone there that says, "Here lies Dobby, a free elf." Then Gringotts, and a dragon, and Hogwarts. The 2nd of May, 1998. You know the shape of it. A castle with every window lit. Every fighter Britain had left standing in the Great Hall, being told to send the children home, and the children not going. Neville Longbottom holding the 7th floor. Ginny Weasley, 16, refusing 4 separate adults. Fred Weasley, dead in a corridor with his brother beside him. Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks, who had a son 8 weeks old at home. And in the boathouse, at about 11 at night, Severus Snape. He gave Harry his memories as he was dying, in a silver thread, and Harry took them up to a stone basin in a dead man's office and fell into 37 years of somebody else's life. He saw a girl on a swing in Cokeworth. He saw a boy who could not stop saying the wrong thing. He saw a doe made of silver light in a Scottish wood, and understood, 4 seconds too late to say anything about it, whose Patronus it was. And near the end, in among all of it, he saw a kitchen he knew. He saw Severus Snape standing in the middle of number 4, Privet Drive, being told about 2 sentences in a letter, and he saw the exact moment the man's face came apart and went back together again, and he understood that his aunt had done that on purpose, for free, for somebody she had every reason to hate. Then he saw the last memory, and it was Dumbledore, and it was about a boy who had to walk into a forest. Harry Potter went out through the entrance hall at about midnight on the 3rd of May, 1998, past a row of bodies and out across the grounds towards the trees, and he was 17 years old. He had the snitch in one hand. He had his mother's letter in his jacket, folded into a small square, gone soft at the creases from 10 months in a pocket. He stopped at the edge of the trees and read it one more time. He did not need to. He knew it by heart by then, all of it, every ordinary line about a baby who would not sleep. It will not be bravery. It will simply be the only thing I can think of to do, and I will do it because there is nothing else in the room. That is what got him into the forest. Not courage, in the end. not a prophecy. A sentence written by a 21-year-old woman in a hidden house who was frightened out of her mind and thought nobody would ever read it, and a sentence said on a back step in Surrey by a woman who thought she was talking about a wig. You are not to be frightened of yourself. He opened the snit. He turned the stone over 3 times in his hand. 4 people came out of the dark and walked with him the rest of the way, and one of them had dark red hair, and told him that it was nearly over, and that it did not hurt, and that they had never once slept. He let the stone fall in the leaves. And then Harry Potter walked into a clearing full of Death Eaters and put his wand down and did not defend himself. He came back because there was a piece of soul in him that was not his, and because the man who killed him had taken his blood into his own body 3 years earlier in a graveyard and had, in doing so, tied Harry Potter's life to his own without ever understanding what he had done. And it ended in the Great Hall, in front of everybody, at dawn, with a wand that would not work for the man holding it, and a killing curse that turned round in the air and went home. Tom Riddle died on the floor of a school he had loved more than any person in his life, and he died as a man of ordinary causes, in front of witnesses, which is the only thing he had ever really been afraid of. Harry Potter went back to Privet Drive on the 11th of May, 1998. He went alone on the train and then the bus because he wanted to arrive the way he used to. The house had been empty for 10 months, and there were leaflets on the mat, and the grass was long, and there was a bowl by the back fence with rainwater in it that nobody had moved. They came back the following day, all 3 of them in the same car. Vernon Dursley went round the house checking windows and complaining about the guttering, and then he shook Harry's hand in the hallway once, quickly, looking at the wall, and got back in his car and drove to Coventry, and that was that, and honestly for him, it was a great deal. Dudley stayed a week. He asked what had happened, and Harry told him about a third of it, and Dudley said it sounded like rubbish, and then asked 4 questions about Fred Weasley that nobody else had thought to ask. And Petunia Dursley stood in her own kitchen and looked at her nephew, who was 17 years old and taller than her, and who had come home. "You are too thin," she said. "Yeah, there is nothing in the house. I will have to go out." "Aunt Petunia?" "There is nothing in the house, Harry. I have not been here since July." He gave her the letter back. He had thought about it the whole way on the bus. He put it on the counter, folded into its small square, and said, "It's yours. It was always yours. She wrote it to you." Petunia Dursley looked at it for a long time without picking it up. "No," she said at last. "She never sent it. She spent 6 drafts deciding whether I was worth the stamp, and she died before she made up her mind." She pushed it back across the counter with 2 fingers. "You keep it. You were the only part of it she was sure about." And that is the end of it, really. I have thought a lot about what changed in this story, and the honest answer is almost nothing. Cedric Diggory still died. Sirius Black still went through the Vade. Fred Weasley still died in a corridor, and Remus Lupin still left a son behind, and Dobby is still under a stone on a beach in Cornwall. The war ran on the same rails to the same station because one woman in Surrey saying a true sentence at 7:30 in the morning does not stop Lord Voldemort, and I am not going to pretend it does. It cost, too. It cost her a marriage and a sofa and 9 years of pretending to a street that her husband was in Coventry. It cost Dudley Dursley the childhood he was on course for, which is the only good thing that was ever taken from him. It cost Arabella Figg her life in a road in her slippers. And it did not make Harry Potter safer. It made him something else. It made him a boy who went into that forest at 17, not because he had nothing to lose, but because he knew exactly what he had, and could name every single piece of it, and went anyway. That is the whole difference. In one world he walked into the trees because there was nothing behind him. In this one he walked in with a photograph of 2 girls on a garden wall in his pocket, and a letter he knew by heart, and a house in Surrey with the light on. I know which one I think is braver. Thanks for staying to the end of this one. It got away from me a bit, and I am not sorry. Tell me in the comments what you would have changed. And if you want the other side of it, I have been circling a script about what happens if Dumbledore says yes to that 13-year-old girl in 1971, and I do not yet know how it ends.